looks like one of those scenes of an old building being purposely dynamited and blown up.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under-infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
The way the structure is collapsing, this was the result of something that was planned. It's not accidental that the first tower just happened to collapse and then the second tower just happened to collapse in exactly the same way. How they accomplished this, we don't know.
In addition to those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
If they had detonated, they were planned to take down a building.
I heard a second explosion.
There was a heavy-duty explosion.
Then there was some secondary explosions and then the subsequent collapses.
An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
To me, it sounded like an explosion.
It sounded like gunfire. Bang, 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 bang. And then all of a sudden, 3 big explosions.
We heard a big explosion coming down.
And then the entire top of the building just blew up.
We saw some kind of explosion.
By the force of the explosions.
Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
Then we get to the lobby. This is a big explosion.
The lobby looked as though a bomb had exploded there.
A huge explosion now raining debris.
It's been a huge explosion.
Huge explosion that we all heard and felt.
We just witnessed some kind of follow-up explosion.
We heard a very loud blast explosion.
And a secondary explosion at Tower 1 camp.
That is another bomb going off. He thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. Planted in the building.
I don't think anybody could have predicted that they would try to use an airplane as a missile, a hijacked airplane as a missile.
Nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
No specific threat involving really domestic operation or involving what happened, obviously, the city's airliner and so forth.
There were no warning signs that I'm aware of.
USA Today reports that in the 2 years before the attacks on September the 11th, NORAD conducted exercises using hijacked airliners as weapons. And one target was the World Trade Center.
In confidential documents from the Philippines obtained by CNN, the plan was clear. He will board any American commercial aircraft, control its cockpit, and dive it at the CIA headquarters. Other buildings targeted the Pentagon and the World Trade Center.
Security and counterterrorism was blinking red, in the words of George Tenet, that the warnings of an imminent attack were so severe that something dramatic should have been done. It was unparalleled. Instead, our president went on a month-long vacation.
The head of Pakistani intelligence at the ISI, Mahmoud Ahmed, requested Omar Sheikh to wire $100,000 to Mohammed Atta, who was the lead hijacker.
Hijacker Mohammed Atta received wire transfers via Pakistan. The man sending the money to Atta is believed to be Ahmed Umar Saeed Sheikh.
Omar Sheikh admitted he was supported by the Pakistan government's intelligence service, the ISI.
Although we are told that 4 or 5 of the alleged hijackers were on each of the flights. If so, their names should have been on the flight manifests. But the flight manifests that have been released contain neither the names of the alleged hijackers nor any Arab names whatsoever.
We know that the men who were supposedly the hijackers had their houses, cars, credit cards paid for by the U.S. government. They were, in truth, agents.
Evidence was also apparently planted. The passport of one of the hijackers on Flight 11 was allegedly found in the rubble.
Goes through the fireball, through the side of the plane, and comes down the ground unscathed. But something happened. For 6 months, they reported they had this passport. Boy, we've got it. We've got the proof. And then the guy stood up and was alive.
Several of these 19 men are still alive.
Of course we're after Saddam Hussein. Bin Laden. He's
January 2001. The Bush administration orders the FBI and intelligence agencies to back off investigations involving the bin Laden family, including 2 of Osama bin Laden's relatives, who were living, guess where? In Falls Church, Virginia, right next to CIA headquarters.
When he was already America's most wanted criminal, he reportedly spent 2 weeks in the American hospital in Dubai, was treated by an American doctor, and visited by the local CIA agent.
We have not seen one piece of evidence that links Osama bin Laden directly to the planning stages of September 11th.
This failure to provide proof was later said to be unnecessary because bin Laden, in a video allegedly found in Afghanistan, admitted responsibility for the attacks. This confession is now widely cited as proof. But the man in this video has darker skin, fuller cheeks, and a broader nose than the Osama bin Laden of all other videos. We again seem to have planted evidence.
In 1976, Osama's older brother Salim bin Laden hired a man in Texas by the name of Jim Bath to handle all the investments in the United States for the bin Laden family. Jim Bath also happens to be a personal, almost lifelong friend and former Air National Guard pilot with George W. Bush. The connections between the Bushes and the bin Ladens become much more clear when George Herbert Walker Bush made trips to Saudi Arabia in 1998 and 2000 to meet with the bin Laden family on behalf of a company called the Carlyle Group.
How could anyone fly a 60-ton, 125-foot wide, 44-foot tall plane through this obstacle course?
The aircraft, before striking the Pentagon, reportedly executed a 270-degree downward spiral, and yet Hani Hanjour was known as a terrible pilot who could not safely fly even a small plane.
No seats, no luggage, no bodies. Nothing but bricks and limestone.
The official explanation is that the intense heat from the jet fuel vaporized the entire plane. Flight 77 had 2 Rolls-Royce engines made of steel and titanium alloy and weigh 6 tons each. It is scientifically impossible that 12 tons of steel and titanium was vaporized by jet fuel.
We're also told that the bodies were able to be identified either by their fingerprints or by the DNA. So what kind of fire can vaporize aluminum and tempered steel and yet leave human bodies intact?
From my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. And as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand.
Shortly after the strike, government agents picked up debris and carried it off. The entire lawn was covered with dirt and gravel, so that any remaining forensic evidence was literally covered up. The videos from security cameras, which would show what really hit the Pentagon, were immediately confiscated by agents of the FBI, and the Department of Justice has to this day refused to release them. If these videos would prove that the Pentagon was really hit by a 757, most of us would assume the government would release them. Pancake theory. according to which the fires, while not melting the steel, heated it up sufficiently to cause the floors weakened by the airplane strikes to break loose from the steel columns, and this started a chain reaction.
So you would expect then from that theory, which is the official theory, to see a whole stack of floors piled up on top of each other and then a spindle of core columns standing too.
The core of each of the twin towers consisted of 47 massive steel columns. If the floors had broken loose from them, these columns would have still been sticking up into the air 1,000 feet.
The plane did not cut all those core columns.
We designed the buildings to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
The building probably could sustain multiple impacts of jetliners.
That the plane flew straight into the building.
Through him, right. Yeah.
So you're saying that the building was actually designed to cope with a hole like that and still survive?
Yeah, it was.
If you had dropped, say, a billiard ball from the top of the World Trade Center, 110 floors up there, it would have taken 8 to 10 seconds to hit the ground, encountering no resistance whatsoever.
The Twin Towers came down in nearly free-fall speed. 200,000 tons of steel shatters and explodes outwards over 500 feet.
This means that floors shattered at an average rate of about 10 floors per second.
There is no scenario for a pancake effect of buildings falling that allows them to fall at the rate of free fall.
Now what can do that? What can move mass out of the way? Explosives. "47 huge steel columns going up the core. They're interconnected. How do you get them to fail simultaneously so the core disappears? It looks like those core columns were cut.
The way we do this is by cutting the beam at an angle.
I started looking at the molten metal. All three buildings, both towers in the rubble, in the basement areas, and Building 7, there's these pools of molten metal.
You'd get down below and you'd see molten steel running down the channel rails, like you're in a foundry. Like lava.
The molten steel was found 3, 4, and 5 weeks later, when the rubble was being removed. He said that molten steel was also found underneath World Trade Center 7.
So I'm looking through the official reports. What do they say about the molten metal? They say nothing. Now, wait a minute. This is important evidence. So where did that come from? Thermite is so hot that it'll just cut through steel, through structural steel, for example, like a knife through butter. The products are molten iron and aluminum oxide, which goes off primarily as a dust. You know those enormous dust clouds? You can imagine when you assemble these chemicals on a large scale. Molten metal pools under both towers after they collapsed, and Building 7. Now, Building 7 wasn't even hit by a jet.
Part of the problem is that most people simply don't know much about Building 7 due to the extraordinary secrecy surrounding this collapse.
And this was a 47-story skyscraper. This building fell at 5:25.
It was not hit by a plane. This building had fires on only 2 or 3 floors.
And it was brought down by what we know was a controlled demolition.
Demolitions, they look just like that. You know, a kink in the middle, and then that building just comes straight down, almost at free fall speed.
They first blow one of the central columns so the building falls in on itself. Building 7 had a classic crimp or wedge. Its central column was blown out first, so it didn't structurally damage buildings just a few feet away from it.
Our office was on the B1 level. As I was talking to a supervisor at 8:46, and all of a sudden we hear, boom! An explosion so hard that pushed us upwards. And it came from the basement between the B2 level and the B3 level. And when I went to verbalize, we hear, boom! The impact of the plane on the top.
As I'm walking by the main freight corridor building in the corridor, that's when I got blown. I mean, the impact of the explosion threw me to the floor, and that's when everything started happening. All of a sudden, a big impact happened again, and all the ceiling tile was falling down, the light fixtures were falling. You know, you got to go clear across the whole from 1 to 2 World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden it happened all over again. Something else hit us to the floor. Right in the basement, you felt it. Walls were caving in, everything that was going on. I mean, I know of people that got killed in the basement. I know of people that got broken legs in the basement. People that got reconstructive surgery because the walls hit them in the face.
Armed with knives, armed with chemical, biological, nuclear weapons. Fanatic terrorist, September 11th. September 11th, killers, September 11th. Terrorists, terrorists of Al-Qaeda, terrorists, nuclear weapons, terrorists. 9/11, terror, terrorist, evil.
September 11th, September 11th. The terrorists, war and danger. September 11th, terrorism, global terrorism, terrorism, terrorists, 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 the terror, terrorists, terrorist, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism, terrorists, terrorism. September 11th, world terrorism, terrorism. September 11th, global terrorism. September the 11th, terror. Weapons of mass destruction. September the 11th, terrorists. The evil terrorists, no.
Terrorism. The words are hypnotically repeated. Terrorism, terrorist, terrorist threat, and of course, believed to be linked to Al-Qaeda. But it's the so-called war on terrorism that's in our faces practically 24/7 as the inescapable focus of our existence.
One day, our grandchildren will look back on this time and ask, how was the war on terror won?
The entire U.S. ruling class, ruling elite, comes to see terrorism as the preferred means, indeed the only means, to provide social cohesion, to provide an enemy image for the society to keep it together. According to neocon theory from Carl Schmitt, you have to have an enemy image in order to have a society. It's a very dangerous thing because now it means that the entire social order, the political parties, intellectual life, politics in general, all based on a monstrous myth. Monstrous myth.
Look, the CIA has done in this country, what they've done to us is unbelievable. Look at the terrorist acts that have occurred. The CIA behind most, if not all of them. We had the Marine Barracks. We had our embassy in Kenya. We had Pan Am 103. We had the USS Cole. We had Oklahoma City. We had the World Trade Center in 1993.
That helped the terrorists blow up the World Trade Center the first time. They built the bomb. They got the driver's license.
The informant, the informant, a fellow named Salam, a 43-year-old former Egyptian army officer, he was given the assignment to put the bomb together. And he went to his supervisor, his FBI supervisor, and said, we're going to put a dummy bomb in here, right? And the FBI supervisor said, no, we're going to put a real bomb.
The FBI actually carried out the attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. They actually hired Ahmad Salam and paid him $1 million and gave him real explosives, a detonator, and told him to build a bomb and to give it to the foolish people that he was controlling to allow them to attack the World Trade Center complex.
Unfortunately for them, there were only 6 people killed, not enough to pass the legislation. So what happened is 2 years later, April 19, 1995, down comes Oklahoma City Murrah building, 168 people killed. 1 year later, the anti-terrorism legislation that takes away many of our constitutional rights and civil liberties is passed.
Because at 9:30 this morning, we were actually running an exercise for over a company of 1,000 people in London, based on simultaneous bombs going off precisely at the railway stations that happened this morning. So I still have the hairs on the back of my neck standing upright.
To get this quite straight, you were running an exercise to see how you would cope with this, and it happened while you were running the exercise?
Precisely.
Supposed to believe is some kind of coincidence, there was also an anti-terrorist drill going on 7/7. And again, just like 9/11, they were talking about attacks on the same targets, the same kind of tube stations, and exactly the same time as the actual attack happened, providing some kind of cover for what must be operations orchestrated in some way by the state.
I am absolutely appalled at how much people in this country do not think. We are given to understand that an Arabic guy out there up in the mountains financed the most elaborate attack on this country.
Do you think some people in a cave were able to have NORAD stand down? Do you think that people in a cave were able to have all of this happen?
And when I think about how many Americans were killed in New York City, and believing as I do that this thing was a setup job, this is a textbook operation that Nazis used, and they've used it over and over again. America has been suckered in one more time.
See
넘어졌는데 밟았어요. 넘어가.
내가 전날 뛰어다녀 그랬어.
이런 거 좀 막아야 돼, 진짜. 기아들이.
기권 3인으로서 방송위원회 168명이 발의한 방송법 인구 개정법률안에 대한 수정안을 가결되었음을 선포합니다.
만약 이 미디어법 개정이 저렇게 이루어지고 그 다음 단계로서 MBC라든가 KBS의 민영화와 관련된 개별 법률에 대한 개정안이 또 제출된다면 이 싸움이 계속되겠죠 아마. 그러나 MBC, KBS와 무관하게라도 이 미디어법 개정이 이루어지면 우리 방송시장은 어마어마한 구조조정의 태풍에 휘말리게 돼 있습니다. 근데 이거는 방송 종사자들 사이의 문제죠. 우리 문제는 아니죠. 라고 생각할 수 있습니다. 근데 이게 모쪼록 이 정보를 걸러서 가공해서 우리에게 제공해주는 어떤 사람들이 언론인들이죠. 주로 미디어의 관리자들이죠. 이 사람들이 특별히 나쁜 목적을 가지고 그걸 하거나 그렇게 하지 않았으면 좋겠다. 그리고 나쁜 목적이 없는 경우에도 너무 자기 목적에 그걸 종속시켜가지고 정보를 자기의 목적을 달성하기 위해서 거기에 유리하게끔 일부러 가공하고 왜곡해서 우리에게 정보를 쏴주지 않았으면 좋겠다. 또는 모두가 그렇게 자기 주관적인 욕망에 따라서 또는 시각에 따라서 그렇게 한다면 서로 다른 시각을 가진 많은 주체들이 있어서 이런저런 각도에서 수상이한 각도에서 편집되고 가공된 정보들을 다 쏴줬으면 좋겠다. 그럼 우리가 취사 선택할 수 있으니까 이렇게 기대할 수밖에 없겠죠. 근데 만약 우리의 현실이 그렇지 않고 거의 모든 주요한 미디어와 그 미디어를 통해서 제공되는 정보의 내용, 그 정보를 가공하는 방식, 이런 것들을 특정한 경향성을 가진 누군가가 거의 모든 미디어를 다 장악하고 자기의 목적에 맞게 데이터를 가공해서 우리에게 제공한다면, 그리고 그와 다른 시각을 가진 정보는 거의 우리에게 제공되지 않는다면, 그렇다면 우리는 자기 자신도 못 느끼는 사이에 빅브라더에게 끌려다니는 게 되는 거죠. 의식을 지배하는 자가 세계를 지배하는 겁니다. 실제 미디어를 누가 지배하고 있는가 하면 신문사나 방송사의 오너나 경영진이 지배하고 있기도 하지만 그러면 이 광고주가 지금 광고를 통해서 지배하고 있죠. MBC가 앵커 교체했는데 이유가 뭡니까? 그 앵커가 9시 뉴스를 하면 광고가 안 들어온다는 거예요. 그 앵커의 뉴스는 클로징 멘트, 오프닝 멘트 할 때 한번 속 시원하게 정부나 뭐 이런 대통령을 한번 살짝 세게 씹는 것도 아니고 살짝 긁어주는 거, 그런 묘미 때문에 시청자들은 좋아했는데 정부에서 싫어하니까 대기업이 광고를 안 주는 겁니다. 그래서 앵커를 교체해요. 그러니까 실제 미디어에서 9시 뉴스의 메인 뉴스의 앵커를 교체할 수 있는 힘을 가진 게 광고주입니다. 근데 이 광고주는 누구냐? 다 재벌이에요. 재벌, 대기업. 그럼 이 대기업들이 방송국도 가지게 되면 광고를 통해서 신문을 지배하고 방송을 반쯤 지배하고 있는 이 대기업들이 이제 광고를 통해서뿐만 아니라 아예 그 신문과 방송을 소유하게 되면 그럼 무슨 일이 벌어질까? 완벽하게 이제 지읒 디귿 이런 이니셜을 가지고 있는 똑같은 시각과 똑같은 철학과 똑같은 보도 방식을 고수하고 있는 이 신문들이 신문 시장을 완전 장악하고 있고 그들과 광고 시장의 대부분을 차지함으로써 미디어를 통제하고 있는 대기업 재벌들이 손잡고 방송사를 소유했다. 그러면 전국적으로 포탈까지 다 지배하는 겁니다. 전국적으로. 왜냐하면 포탈에 다른 컨텐츠를 제공할 수 있는 마이너리티 그룹이 존속하기 어려워지기 때문에. 그럼 전국적으로 이 모든 시사, 교양, 보도와 관련되어 있는 모든 미디어가 하나의 정향성, 하나의 세계관, 동일한 보도 방식, 심지어는 왜곡과 과장과 조작과 누락을 서슴지 않는 그와 같은 과도한 애국심과 사명감을 가지고 있는 집단에게 완벽하게 미디어가 장악되는 사태가 벌어지는 거죠. 이렇게 되면 정부가 어디 방송사 사장을 마음에 드는 사람을 임명하려고 노력을 한다든가 이 카르텔이 기존에 대한민국을 완전 지배하게 되는 겁니다. 미디어를 지배하는 자가 의식을 지배하고 대중의 의식을 지배하는 자가 권력을 통제하게 되어 있습니다. 그러니까 지금 이 미디어법에서 겸용 규제 그리고 진입 규제를 완전히 푼다는 이 정부 여당의 개정안이라는 것은 전국적으로 모든 종류의 미디어를 하나의 손 아래 결집시킴으로써 항구적으로 대한민국을 50년, 60년간 지난 10년만 빼고 대한민국 건국 이후에 지난 10년을 제외하고 나머지 50년 이상을 지배했던 지배 카르텔의 완벽한 완성을 이야기를 하는 겁니다.
모르지만 한겨레 신문이 취재해서 보도한 내용들을 보면 기업체에
반협박을 한다는 거
그렇죠. 좀 잘 지내보죠 우리 그런 식으로
그래서
하기도
만약에
하고.
광고를 안 해준다 신문사에다가
그러면
종편사에다
이제 비판적인 기사를 쓰는 거죠. 심지어 오늘 한겨레 신문 보도를 보면 동아에서 하는 채널 A 같은 경우에 그 광고주 대상으로 설명하는 자리에서 아예 우리 그 보도에 나오면 우리한테 광고를 하면 보도에 이렇게 나오고 당신들 전문으로 하는 어떤 프로를 만들어주겠다라는 식으로 광고 영업을 했다고 해요. 이건 아주 심각한 거죠.
그렇죠.
보도와 광고를 연결해서 그걸 가지고 거래를 하는 거니까 그렇게 한다면 기업에 당신들 우리한테 광고 좀 하지? 안 해? 털면 먼지 안 나오겠어? 조져? 이렇게 나갈 수 있는 거예요.
그렇지. 기업 입장에서는 이게 대단히 공포스러운 거죠.
그렇죠.
거꾸로 이제 광고를 주면 문제가 있어 넘어가겠다는 얘기죠. 아니 광고를 주면 오히려 좋게 써주겠다는 거 아니야 이제 지금. 넘어가겠다.
안녕하십니까. 전국 언론노동조합 문화방송본부에서 전해드리는 뉴스 속보입니다. 한나라당이 언론학법을 통과시켜 방송을 장악하려 하고 있습니다. 대한민국 국민의 표현과 언론의 자유를 위협하고 있습니다. 민주주의도 위태롭습니다. 그래서 이러한 대한민국의 현실을 전 세계에 알리고자 합니다. 전국 언론노동조합 문화방송본부에서는 전 세계인들에게 보내는 메시지를 준비했습니다.
This is an urgent message. It's been only a year since President Lee Myung-bak took office. However, our nation's foundation of liberal democracy is on the verge of collapsing. The ruling Grand National Party is trying to push a legislation to restrict the freedom of speech without agreement from the opposition. In Korea, this is called 날치기, which means rushing the bill through. This is raising a lot of public anger, and our nation is on the brink of losing our freedom of speech.
韩国民主主义正面临着危机。13亿中国人民啊，请韩国大国家党高星级胡恒吉打一通抗议电话吧。怎么搞的？像个新手。请再打一通电话吧。这一通请打给金正武、金正武国会议长。全世界正在瞩目，请检点一下自己的言行。
Ici, en Corée du Sud, il y aura bientôt une couple qui étonnera sans doute le monde entier, plus que le remariage du président français Sarkozy avec une actrice brune. C'est justement la combinaison des trois grands journaux extrêmement conservateurs, c'est-à-dire Jo Jung-dong, avec une émission à la télévision. Leur combinaison sera totalement une catastrophe contre le développement d'une démocratie coréenne. Bien que la plupart des Coréens s'y opposent ardemment, le parti au pouvoir Hannaradang est en train de fermer toutes les oreilles pour ne pas écouter ce que le peuple dit. Malgré tout cela, il n'y a pas de gouvernement qui pourrait gagner son peuple.
En Corea, ahora están desapareciendo muchas las palabras. Democracia, sentido común, comunicación, libertad de la prensa. ¡Qué barbaridad! El tiempo está volviendo atrás en Corea. La historia retrocedió y la dictadura renació. 放送に関する法律の改正によって経済が活性化するというハンナラとの主張は嘘です。もう一回申し上げます。全くの嘘です。本当に嘘です。国会の文化観光放送中心委員会ではいきなり日本語が登場しました。
이 말이 됩니까? 겐세이 놓고 끼어들으시면 계속 늦어지니까 들으세요. 들으시고.
私たちがハンナラとから聞きたい言葉は妨害ではなくてすみませんという謝罪の言葉です。
대한민국의 민주주의를 지키기 위해 저희는 끝까지 싸우겠습니다. 여러분도 동참해 주십시오. 언론 장악 저지 투쟁!
Fight against control of speech.
Pour la liberté de la presse.
言論弾圧反対闘争
No al control de la prensa.
言论弹压，我们抵制到底。